The laughter came fast. It echoed off the walls like they'd all been waiting for the same punchline. I hadn't told a joke, but judging by the smirks and sideways glances, apparently, I was one. It happened during the Monday strategy briefing. I had just introduced myself to the new command unit, standing in a room full of men with creased uniforms and silver pins that caught the light too easily. I said my name, my rank, my credentials. Then someone asked about my assignment. I answered, Flight Operations Advisor. That was all it took. One of the captains actually snorted. A few others exchanged. Looks like they were silently ranking how ridiculous my desk job was. Then came the Admiral. Flight Ops Advisor? He repeated with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. What are you? A damn social worker for the equipment logs. We ordered a pilot. I could have laughed too. Might have been easier, but I just stood there, hands behind my back, pretending my skin wasn't burning. I didn't bother explaining where the name Ghost Hawk came from. I knew it wouldn't matter. Not in that room. Not to them. It wasn't the first time I'd been underestimated. It certainly wouldn't be the last. That's the thing about rooms like those. People make up their minds about you before you even open your mouth. And sometimes, they decide you're invisible. Or worse, a problem. The rest of the meeting blurred past. I remember nodding when I had to, scribbling notes I didn't care about. They handed out flight assignments, like candy, passing my name without pause. My squadron lead barely looked up. I was a decorated pilot, a combat rescue specialist, with 87 successful missions. And somehow, I still felt like an intern. No one wanted to train. That day stayed with me, not because of the insult, but because it confirmed what I'd already begun to suspect. I was being boxed in, quietly erased from the narrative. My name would never make it onto the plaques or the promotion lists, not while certain people held the markers. I used to think that if I just kept doing good work, eventually someone would notice. That integrity spoke for itself. Turns out, silence can be louder than truth in places like this. So I stopped waiting. I started watching. I listened to the offhand remarks, tracked the shifts in tone, and followed the paper trails. Somewhere in all that noise, I found the story no one wanted told. Mine. If you've ever sat in a room and felt the whole world tilt against you, if you've been laughed at for simply existing, then maybe you'll understand why I'm telling this now. Not because I want pity, and not because I'm angry, though I was for a long time. I'm telling it because silence is what they count on. And I've been quiet for too long. My name is Captain Elisa Richards. I flew Black Hawks into places people prayed they'd never see. I brought soldiers home from firestorms and chaos. I've stitched bodies in midair with my bare hands. And once, a long time ago, they called me Ghost Hawk. Not because I was quiet, but because I always came back when no one else would. This is the story they tried to bury. And I think it's time you heard it. It started with the coffee. Small thing. Insignificant, really. But when I walked into the operations room my first morning and found LTs and below written in Sharpie on a styrofoam cup, placed deliberately at my seat, I knew exactly what kind of welcome this was going to be. I was a captain. I had logged more combat hours than half the officers in that room combined. I'd flown into black zones without air support, pulled wounded soldiers out, while dodging surface fire. But at Naval Base Oakhurst, I wasn't a warfighter. I was a woman with a desk. I didn't say anything. Just poured my coffee and drank it out of that damn cup. When it was empty, I slowly crushed the styrofoam in my hand, making sure the snap was audible, before dropping it deliberately into the waste bin. Later that day, I met my assigned squadron lead, Commander Blake Monroe. He gave me the once-over like I was a recruit. No handshake, no eye contact, just a muttered, "We'll find something for you." By something, he meant inventory reports, engine log reviews, and training simulations so dull, they made my teeth itch. My official role was Flight Operations Advisor. That sounded important, until I realized it was code for stay in the office, don't touch the gear. I wasn't assigned to any upcoming ops. No sorties. No air patrols, just paperwork. The resentment was quiet at first, like static you could almost ignore. Then came the briefings I wasn't invited to, the side conversations that stopped when I walked by, the missions I learned about after they happened. They didn't say I wasn't welcome, they just pretended I wasn't there. The worst of it wasn't the outright dismissal. It was the knowledge that I couldn't call it out, without looking like I couldn't take the heat. In this game, the moment you showed hurt, they labeled you fragile. So I kept my mouth shut and did the work they gave me. Until the Vaughn op. 3 weeks in, I spotted a red flag in one of the mission files. An equipment manifest that listed a faulty hydraulic line we'd flagged months ago. I brought it to Monroe. He told me to leave the technicals to the techs. Said the bird had already passed pre-flight. That night, I stayed late and confirmed the issue hadn't been resolved. The crew was scheduled to fly out at dawn. I had 2 options: keep quiet and let the dice roll, or speak up and risk insubordination. I called a halt. They grounded the chopper, checked the line, and found a near-complete fluid blockage. If it had gone up, it would have stalled mid-air. Maybe over water. Maybe with men inside. The next day, I was called into Monroe's office. He didn't thank me. He didn't ask for the report. He handed me a written reprimand for violating the chain of command. Said if I pulled a stunt like that again, I'd be reassigned to base logistics. Permanent. I signed it. Didn't speak. Monroe added, voice low. You saved lives, Richards. We both know that. But you cost the base 4 hours of flight time. Next time, find a way to save the men and the paperwork. The life-saving action had forced a balance. They couldn't ruin me entirely, but they could still punish the insubordination. But something changed after that. I noticed the mechanics started nodding at me when I passed the hangar. One of the junior pilots quietly slid me a copy of an old after-action report. I'd never seen one where my name should have been listed but wasn't. Someone even left a coffee thermos on my desk. No label, just hot and full. They still didn't talk to me in the briefings. I wasn't invited out to drinks or pulled into backroom strategy huddles. But there was a shift, a tension. Like some of them had started to wonder if I was more than what they'd assumed. Like maybe I wasn't there just to tick a diversity box. Truth is, I didn't need their friendship. I needed airspace. I needed to fly. But the more I pushed for assignments, the more doors quietly closed. Ops were full. Flights were locked. Reports got misfiled. It was like the base had grown a second skin, designed to keep me out. Still, I watched. I listened. I filed my own reports, and I saved copies. I knew this wasn't just about me anymore. There was a system here, one that fed on silence and reputation and shadow deals. I was either going to be digested by it, or I was going to choke it on the way down. They never said it outright, never stamped it in ink. But that first week, that first reprimand, that first laugh in the briefing room, they were all just signals. Signals that said, you're not one of us. And all I could think was, not yet. We got the call just before midnight. A SEAL team was stationed outside Al-Hasaka, near the Syrian border. Extraction had already been scrubbed twice due to the weather. The storm that rolled in was thick, fast, and shifting by the minute. Most birds wouldn't even taxi in that mess, let alone lift. Command said AA abort. Visibility was under 50 feet. High wind shear, no GPS lock. Risk unacceptable. They used every phrase in the manual. I asked how many guys were on the ground. 7. 2 wounded, 1 critically. They said they'd reassess at first light. I didn't wait. I prepped the Hawk myself. My crew chief, Ramirez, didn't even argue. Just checked the rotors and strapped in. He knew me, knew that tone in my voice. It was the one I used when there was no turning back. The storm hit us 2 minutes after we lifted. Dust slammed the cockpit like waves, turning everything the same shade of orange. My HUD was useless. I flew on sound, on muscle memory, on every sense except sight. The air felt alive and angry, like it wanted us swallowed whole. I kept talking to the team on the ground, short bursts through static. They were losing blood. They were running out of time. I didn't feel brave. I felt cold. Not scared. Just locked in. Like the part of me that panicked had been left on the tarmac. The LZ was barely a clearing. One flare. Broken terrain. I brought her down hard. Right skids first, kissed rock, then balanced it out. I kept the blades spinning, hovering just off the dust line while Ramirez and 2 SEALs hauled the wounded on board. I didn't even see their faces. Just arms, shadows, movement. The ride back was worse. We were heavy, barely gaining altitude. I had to snake between valleys to avoid crosswinds. The sand kept seeping into everything, scratching at the glass, grinding inside the gears. At one point, the tail kicked, and we dipped so fast my stomach tried to climb out of my throat. But I held her steady. We climbed. When we landed at the forward base, the medics were already waiting. One of the SEALs, covered in blood and dirt, grabbed my arm and said, "We thought we were ghosts. Then we saw yours." That was it. Ghost Hawk stuck after that. It wasn't about being stealthy or silent. It was about showing up when no one else would. About flying into places that didn't want you and leaving with the people who couldn't walk out on their own. I didn't think of it as heroism. I still don't. It was the job. It was also the last mission where command gave me any kind of real trust. After that, things got quiet. Promotions stalled. Requests ignored. I figured out later why. But that night in that storm, I only had one thought. Don't let them die out there. After the mission, I waited. Not for applause, but for protocol. A debrief. A citation. Some kind of follow-up. When it didn't come within the week, I thought maybe the paperwork was slow. When it didn't come within the month, I stopped pretending. They handed out commendations 2 weeks later. Monroe got one. So did the officer who initially approved the op, even though he wasn't in the air that night. I scanned the list twice. My name wasn't there. I asked Monroe directly. He looked me in the eye and said, "Command's call. Nothing personal." Then he went back to reading his email. I filed a formal request to review the after-action report. The version I received had no mention of my name, flight ID, or aircraft number. The rescue was labeled Joint Aerial Support. No pilot listed, no timeline. Just a vague paragraph about rapid recovery efforts under hazardous conditions. I brought it up with a senior logistics officer I trusted. He skimmed the file, frowned, then slid it back across the desk like it was radioactive. "Might want to let this one go," he said. "People upstairs don't like their lines redrawn." Let it go. That phrase followed me around like a shadow. I heard it when I asked for updates on flight status. I heard it when I pushed for rotation back into live operations. I even heard it from friends who meant well, who thought I was better off not stirring mud in a storm. What they didn't understand was that I wasn't chasing glory. I was trying to understand why the only part of the mission that had disappeared was me. One night, alone in the file room, I found an early incident log, dated the night of the extraction. My name was there, logged in at 23:46. Status: airborne. That log vanished a week later, replaced with a blank timestamp. I wasn't imagining it. I was being deleted. Someone had decided that my presence in that mission was inconvenient, that my actions didn't fit the narrative. So they rewrote it, stripped it down, sanitized the version that made its way up the chain. And the more I looked, the clearer it became. This wasn't just a mistake. It was deliberate. He found me outside the motor pool, waiting for the crew to finish a rotor check. Young kid. Fresh boots. Looked too new to shave. He walked up slowly, like he wasn't sure if I was going to yell or salute. "Ma'am," he said, and held out a small envelope. "My brother asked me to give you this. Said, if anything ever happened, it should go to the woman who flew him out of hell." I didn't say a word, just nodded and took it. Inside was a USB drive. No name, no note. Just wait. I slipped it in my pocket and walked away. It took me 2 days to open it. I waited until the hangar was empty and the air was still. I sat in my office, door locked, coffee cold. When I plugged it in, the folder opened with a single file. A video. Timestamped 6 months before the Von Op. The name on the file was Ethan Marks. The screen lit up with a face I barely recognized. Scruffy beard, pale green eyes, tactical gear, half-zipped, like he'd recorded it between missions. He looked tired, but focused. "If you're watching this," he said, "I didn't make it back." He paused, then smiled, just barely. "I don't know who's listening. Could be family, could be some suit at command, but I'm hoping it's Captain Richards, because this is really for her." I froze. "You probably don't even remember me," he said. Operation Night Storm, Syria. The sandstorm was so bad that we couldn't see our boots. You flew in anyway. Got us out. Saved my life. He shifted, cleared his throat. I remember thinking, no way that chopper was real. We'd already said our goodbyes down there. But then we heard the blades. Then we saw the silhouette. You didn't speak. You didn't wait. You just landed and hauled us out. He glanced away for a second, then looked back. I found out later who you were, and I found out what happened to you after. They didn't give you the medal. They didn't list your name. But we knew. Every guy on that bird knew. Oh, he leaned in, voice lower now. My brother's in command now. Jonathan Marks, Vice Admiral. You probably already figured that out. He's the one who tried to clean up your file, but he couldn't touch the original raw footage. I don't know what he was trying to protect, but I'm sorry. I left you this. The truth. He went quiet, just for a second. Then he smiled again. You didn't fly alone that night. We were with you. We still are. The screen faded to black. I sat there for a long time. The silence after his voice felt heavier than anything I'd carried in combat. Not grief, not anger. Something else. A kind of knowing. Ethan Marks, one of the men I had flown through fire for. Gone now, but not silent. His brother had erased me from the record. But Ethan had left me proof. He left me a truth no one could deny, because it came from the man who paid the price. The truth was, the man who buried my career was the brother of the man I saved. The sheer irony of it made me sick. That USB stayed with me from that day on. In my flight vest. In my locker. Even under my pillow some nights. Not because I needed it, but because I owed it to Ethan to make sure someone heard him. And I owed it to myself to make sure they finally saw me. The tribunal was held in a conference hall, too polished to feel honest. Rows of suits, rows of ribbons, men and women who'd spent years learning how to keep their expressions unreadable. I stood in the center of it, uniform pressed, heart steady. I didn't open with accusations. I didn't talk about chain of command, buried reports, or missed commendations. I just said I had a message and played the recording. Ethan's voice filled the room. His words came out clear, measured, impossible to ignore. You could hear the weight of what he carried. The mission. The gratitude. The truth. He spoke about the storm, the sand, and the silence that followed. He named me. Not once, but several times. By the end, no one moved. Vice Admiral Jonathan Marks didn't look at me. He stared down at the table like he was trying to rewind time. When asked to respond, he looked up, his face a mask of practiced indifference, and said, "The video is clearly an emotional, posthumous account, but its evidentiary value is hearsay. The official after-action report remains classified." I didn't flinch. I reached into my briefcase and slid a stack of physical documents across the table. I have the raw flight telemetry logs, Admiral, and the original incident log, signed by your former flight commander. They contradict the classified report. He finally broke. His shoulders sagged. He leaned forward and, in a voice barely above a whisper, said, "It was a mistake. I was protecting my family, and I made a choice I can't defend." That was all. There were no raised voices, no dramatic fallout, just notes taken, heads nodded, and a quiet, final acknowledgement that what had happened wasn't right. I wasn't reinstated to active combat. No medals were pinned to my chest. But a week later, I got a call from Rear Admiral Sinclair. He asked if I would consider a new role: teaching, Naval Academy, aviation leadership. I didn't say yes right away. I wasn't sure if that was the path I wanted, but something about it stuck. A few months later, I walked into my first classroom. 20 cadets, fresh faces, flight manuals stacked like bricks. They looked up at me with a mix of curiosity and nerves. I didn't give them a speech, just wrote my name on the board. Then I turned and said, "They used to call me Flight Operations Advisor, but you can call me Ghost Hawk. And no one flies alone." That was it. No applause, no whispers, just a few nods. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something shift back into place. I don't think justice ever really feels perfect. It doesn't tie things up the way stories try to. But truth does something better. It steadies you, reminds you that you're still here, still standing. Ethan's voice will stay with me for the rest of my life. Not because of what it cost him, but because of what he chose to do with it. He didn't just remember, he passed it on. And now, that's what I do too. I teach them to fly. I teach them to fight for each other. And I teach them that when the silence gets too loud, you speak anyway.